Amazing. First time here. Hopefully it's not the last time, but never take it for granted. You never know if you're going to come back, so just enjoy the experience.
On today's episode of Inside the Mavs, we are live to get you ready for the NBA Finals, our official NBA Finals preview show on Inside the Mavs, presented by Aura. Welcome to Inside the Mavs, presented by Aura. I'm your host, Kevin Gray, Mavericks pre- and post-game host on the Dallas Mavericks radio network. Appreciate you joining us here for the latest episode of Inside the Mavs. We are live on Kevin Gray Sports on YouTube. Make sure you download and subscribe to the Inside the Mavs podcast wherever you get your podcasts for free. Give it a 5-star rating and write a review for it while you're there. And you can also find me on Twitter at Kevin Gray Sports. Joining me, of course, on the show today, live from Boston, Massachusetts, where the Dallas Mavericks and the Boston Celtics on the practice floor today ahead of Game 1 tomorrow night in the NBA Finals. He covers the Dallas Mavericks, of course, for Sports Illustrated. Grant Afseth here with me on the show this evening. Grant, what's going on? How we doing?
I'm doing pretty good. I survived the 1,000 crowd media room, so that was nice. A lot of apparently there was a fire truck that pulled up. Not sure what was going on with that one, but yeah, definitely excited to get that first day, know where I'm going, get the credential, and see how it's going to be going forward, because it's going to be crazy. You know, between the global games, World Cup, that type of setup, this is like times 10 for that type of stuff. It's going to be crazy.
Yeah, before we dive into the game itself tomorrow and the series itself, what we expect in terms of being a long series, kind of just describe, the atmosphere there in Boston. You talked about some of the amount of media that's there, obviously international media, from all over the world covering this NBA Finals, especially with the amount of international players in this Finals as well. But kind of describe to me kind of the atmosphere that you've experienced and what's been taking place throughout the first day or so there, and how things are feeling in Boston getting ready for the finals.
Yeah, definitely. It seems like there's, an obvious sense of anticipation for Game 1. These are two teams that are playing very well. I mean, you kind of have to be to reach the finals, so that's pretty straightforward. But I think this has a vibe of being one of those better matchups that we've had over the last decade. Because some of them have been a little underwhelming at times, but I think this one has the makings to be highly entertaining. I think a lot of people have that sense as well. Like two superstars, on the Mavericks, Jayson Tatum on the Celtics, very talented team around him as well. So I think, obviously the entertainment value, a lot of the storylines are what drives the anticipation as well. Like Kyrie Irving, being back in Boston, Porzingis playing against the Mavs. So I think there's just a lot of excitement level for the quality of play and also the conversation around it.
Well, we will have plenty of conversation on this episode of Inside the Mavs. Make sure you drop in your comments, your questions, your thoughts going into Game 1 of the NBA Finals. We'll answer those throughout the course of the show. This will serve as our official preview show of the NBA Finals between the Mavericks and the Celtics. So definitely get your questions, get your comments, get your thoughts in here throughout the course of our show. This one coming immediately from Daniel M. I think the only thing that does concern me as far as the matchup goes is how do you guard Kristaps Porzingis, known for stretching the floor at the 5 position, and our bigs are much more traditional. What would your response to be to that initial thought? Because we know that Kristaps Porzingis has been officially cleared to go for the NBA Finals, coming back after dealing with that calf injury that's kept him out, since late April, and he will be ready to go for Game 1 of the Finals. Your thoughts on that particular thought in question there?
Well, I think based off the very limited opportunities that we get to see the substance of actual practices, what I've been able to see during this week has actually kind of, I feel like, been a solid indication if they, obviously if they do utilize the strategy, but they've been working a ton on veer switching with the big. with Tyson Chandler, Sean Sweeney, and the workout group. Basically, every day that I've gone to a practice, I've seen the bigs, like Derek Lively, Cleaver, Derek or Daniel Gafford. All of them have been, working on making that judgment call where they have to switch with the guard and then, take the drive while the guard either gets the pop threat or they're just getting out on the pop threat, guarding 2 with 1 and not making the switch. So I think, that's something that I've, brought up and, we've talked about a lot, dating back to Summer League. They've been working on this concept with Derek Lively forever. I was asking him about this after Summer League games, and it was his first exposure to like NBA, coverages and all that stuff. So, all this about a calendar year at this point, from that, about a month from now, since that, really kicked up a year ago. I think there's been a lot of time for, Lively to be able to get those reps in, get comfortable in the schemes. And they haven't really had to break out too much of veer switching yet. But I think also soft switching like they have in general could be viable with, Lively showing, his ability to handle guys like Anthony Edwards and, other top players that he's guarded at times throughout this playoffs. And, they've just been more creative with their schemes in general. Like, I think they could still go out and zone up the defense a little bit where they're really rotating off the boxes and the elbows and funneling things to the big. Because I think now that it's playoff basketball in comparison to traditional basketball, like regular season, you can get that effort, that extra gear from a guy like Luka Dončić or Kyrie Irving, where you're not really going to want them to run a shooter off the line in the regular season, unlike Game 67. But they've had rest, before this Game 1, and you're going to, expect that extra gear, and they, should be more than willing to give it since they've already given it throughout this postseason run. So I think those are just some of those general strategies. They haven't really liked to, blitz players too often, if they can help themselves from having to do it. So I think it'll probably be those other strategies that they'll toggle through. And they've shown us as well throughout this run that they're not going to give great players the same look over and over and over again like they did early in the season with a lot of drop coverage.
Yeah, it should be interesting to be able to see how those bigs react to obviously the spacing that Boston provides, especially with Kristaps Porzingis' ability to stretch the floor. Al Horford can do the same coming off the bench, and I think that's one big aspect for Boston. If you're looking at, for them, their rotations now go back to, for Horford, you can play those 20 to 22 minutes versus having to play the extended minutes, especially now at the age of 38. With Porzingis back now, you can kind of have your lineup set 1 through 8, if you will, if you're Boston. And we'll see how much Porzingis is able to go coming off that calf injury, because we know that those injuries are tricky. But his elements of being able to stretch the floor from 3, but also on the defensive end, providing that rim protection and shot blocking, is going to be interesting to see how those bigs of the Mavericks react, and something that I think for a lot of us who have watched these two teams play throughout the year will be a huge sign on how things go for the rest of the series in the way that it should and could play out for the Mavericks, depending on what they are able to get from Lively and Gafford, who, especially when they're playing together, we know about that 48 minutes when they're playing and splitting, 24 minutes. We may see a little bit more extended minutes for Derek Lively because of just how well he's playing, but their production is going to be invaluable in this series based off of what they provide for the Mavericks in that way.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, after doing some Celtics, shows as well, too, and getting their perspective, I think they have an expectation of, the Mavericks bigs and their athleticism potentially, pushing Boston into having to play Xavier Tillman some as well, their dirty work guy. So I think there was also some commentary that I heard, from Gary Washburn as well, too. And, not commentary, conversation that we had together, because we were quite literally talking to each other. But he had mentioned Al Horford has had quite a bit of ups and downs as a shooter. Like in Cleveland, I think games 1 and 2, he shot a combined 0 for 10 from 3. But then he had a game where he really started to pop off and make like 7 threes or something like that, if I remember correctly. So he still expects the Mavericks to, maybe dare Al Horford to shoot and live with those results, and hopefully it doesn't, hurt them, which could be a very realistic possibility because we have seen bigs that are shooting threats still get those open shots. They do their best to get out on them, but you had to give up something. And, whether it's Naz Reid, more so Naz Reid than Karl Anthony Towns. But they're, last round, they even did that as well when they went with that 4-5 combo to be able to go 5 out. And of course, they don't have a Kyle Anderson in the series where it takes him 10 seconds to shoot the ball.
Right.
You think he might not even be shooting the ball, but somehow he still is, and Derek Lively can still get out on him and stuff like that. But yeah, I think it'll be harder to do these strategies, and you might get burned for it at times. But definitely one of those things where it looks genius if they're really bricking shots that day, or it looks like what's going on. This team was great defensively for 3 rounds. Why is this happening? How did they get this far? That's also a possibility if you're going to dare good shooters to shoot. But I think on the flip side, if we're going to look at the offense, the cross-matching that Boston does will put the bigs in different positions, like we saw in March 1st and other situations when Porzingis was brought into the action. It's kind of like when Jokic was brought into action in matchups against Denver. They were very aggressive with blitzing to make them play out of the pocket. And then, with Luka bringing in, like PJ Washington as a screener. And then that forced him to play in the short roll, which then kind of negates the advantage of having, that traditional pick and roll offensive element with like a Derek Lively or Daniel Gafford, because Jayson Tatum is on him and he's going to switch whenever that screen occurs. So I think a lot of it's going to have to be about the creativity of the half-court offense to get those like lobs, the stuff that we're typically seeing, or ISO just production where, great players like Kyrie Irving or Luka are breaking down great defenders, getting downhill and making a pass to the dunker spot. But also I think as well, the offensive glass will be very vital for them to make an impact, because Boston isn't a great rebounding team. As we know with Porzingis, that's not necessarily one of his great strengths because he's, a thinner framed guy. Being 7'3", you're not going to be the quickest reaction, speed type of player as well too. And then also Al Horford as well has never been a great rebounder either. So if, you're going to have Jayson Tatum on you, that's a less quality, box out guy compared to a center. So like as Derek Lively even mentioned, I think I asked him about this when I first really started seeing cross matching early in the season. I think it was in like that New Orleans trip where the 2 games, and then Valanciunas was guarding Derek Jones a lot. And, Lively was being guarded, by a wing. I think Herb Jones very often. Washington Wizards used that strategy too. So I asked him about it then, and he basically said that, when that happens, I've got to really punish the small on the glass. Like I've got to be a monster on the board. So I think, that's kind of along the lines of what we're probably going to see a lot of. But I think, just to wrap that all up, I think whenever the Celtics go with their bench, I think if I remember correctly, what they like to do is just switch everything. I think there'll also be a mix of that as well too, where we're going to have to, see basically dirty work stuff in the paint, and then the Mavs offensive creativity, potentially using like double drag screens, zoom actions, all that stuff, how they can engage, the right player they want in the action. And then as play finishers, whether they're involved in the action on the handoff or they're in the dunker spot or whatever it may be, seeing them finish the play is going to be vital.
Yeah, those double drag screens that the Mavericks are using against Minnesota were extremely effective in the Western Conference Finals, something that they have been able to utilize quite a bit as the playoffs have gone on. A question here from David. Who do you guys think will have to step up in their role for the Mavs to win in Boston? Obviously, everyone needs to, but who do you feel needs to take their game to the next level? And that's an interesting one because, the focus will be obviously on the stars with Luka and Kyrie and Jayson Tatum and Jaylen Brown. But when you start looking at the others, the one for me that I immediately go to is PJ Washington. I mean, we have seen the kind of dramatic effect that he has had in the postseason in the games, what was 2 through 4 against the Oklahoma City Thunder. He really was massive in terms of his play, whether it be knocking down corner shots. Obviously, he hit the game-winning free throws to seal the series to win. But what he provides on both ends of the floor, that for me is kind of one of my X factors for the Mavericks is you kind of know what you're going to get from Luka and Kyrie in terms of their ability to let the games come to them. But it's going to be about these others. And for me specifically, PJ Washington, especially when he has his matchups against, I'm sure he'll take his turns on Jaylen Brown and Jayson Tatum as this series goes on. His defense, along with Derrick Jones Jr., is going to be huge on how they defend both Tatum and Brown and what kind of effect that they're going to put on them throughout this series. But it would be twofold for me. I guess I would say both PJ Washington and Derrick Jones Jr. because their defense especially is going to be vital in this series against two guys that can really get to the rim and be able to get downhill at times, and Tatum and Brown in that way.
Yeah, and I think building on that overall too, I think the wing just general position is going to be very important because I think Derrick Jones is someone that I've heard a lot from Boston's perspective as being a real threat because he's very athletic, and their offense in the fast break has been so lethal. And I think that could be a problem for Boston because I think you also have to think too of like some of the matchups. Like they're not going to beat you down the floor with either Porzingis or Horford probably at any time with Gafford and Lively as the fives for this team. But also if you do end up in situations where they're playing Porzingis with Horford because of that cross matching that we talked about, that's going to be even more important for transition offense to run them off the court because I think that's where they'll be at their best defensively as a team, Boston, when they have both of those guys on the court because you can keep that traditional, center option guarding the ball screen, but then you also have one of them as the low defender to make that rotation and be able to hold their own effectively. Whether they get creative in those smaller lineups where they're sending late doubles potentially or, doing stuff like that, that could kind of change my thought on that a little bit. But I do think that's where Derrick Jones is going to be really important when, Boston's going bigger. You're going to have to really run them off the court. But I think, PJ Washington will be even more important in general because for everything you said defensively, that's super important and at the forefront. But then, kind of building back off of that short roll stuff. If you're the one being brought up to screen in the traditional screening actions and you're playing out of the pocket, you can't smoke floaters playing off two in the paint. You can't make bad reads. You got to hit the wide open pick and pop three because something I'm compounding off of stuff, but like something that I really have been intrigued by, and I forgot who exactly pointed out. It was some former player that I was listening to while I was doing video on it, so it was kind of cool to hear it be highlighted. But like the Mavs have been very effective at bringing screens out further, so that if that happens with to really make the defense have to swarm and make those extra efforts, and they know they're going to draw those coverages with the blitzing and all that stuff, so you might as well bring it out further and create more ground to cover. And if they're going to continue to do that with PJ in the pocket, he's going to have to hit the threes. He got those on the pop against Minnesota as well, and it was inconsistent at times. I mean, that's the nature of shooting, but you're going to need to make the defense pay. And if he can hit those threes at a very high clip, that would be a very quick way to make the Celtics have to really rethink or just get burned by doing their approach.
Yeah, and one thing, especially when talking about the three-point shooting of the Mavericks and how the Boston Celtics will defend it, the Mavericks were terrific this season in terms of their corner threes. Boston, though, they don't give up corner threes. Not only do they don't give them up, even when they do, opposing teams don't make a lot of them either. So the Mavericks are going to make sure that they're manufacturing some offense outside of those corner threes because that's where guys like PJ Washington, Derrick Jones Jr., Josh Green, and others to a degree have lived and be able to be successful in this postseason. Boston is going to take away some of that. And I am curious as to what Boston will decide to give up in terms of this series because the attention that will be on Luka, that will be on Kyrie and their abilities to be able to make plays for themselves and for others, you've got to be able to live with something being given up in this series. And I'm interested to see how that plays itself out, especially in game one as these two teams, one of the aspects about it is the Mavericks are coming off a week off in terms of rest after winning in the Western Conference Finals. The Celtics have been off the last 9-10 days as far as getting their rest after sweeping the Indiana Pacers. So I do wonder how much rust will play a factor into game one in terms of that feeling out process. But, Grant, as these series have gone on, especially in thinking about this in Kyrie's case, you can't feel your way into a game one of an NBA Finals. Being the aggressor, I think, is going to be extremely important for this team. I know Kyrie has loved the game to come to him, especially during the second halves. But in this series against this team as talented as Boston, I would think being the aggressor and being the one to punch first is going to be huge for them because the Mavericks tend to be the team that's been really good at counterpunching, but they've got to be, I feel like, the aggressors starting off in game one in my mind to really give themselves some confidence knowing what they need to do against a team like Boston here.
Yeah, I definitely agree, because also if we're going to kind of compound off of what we said earlier about what we expect the coverages to look like, if Luka's going to get blitzed by bringing Porzingis into the action, and then they're going to try to negate the value of traditional 1-5 pick and rolls by having Tatum on, Gafford, and then, eventually Lively when that substitution is made, that's where Kyrie Irving, you would think from a strategic approach from the Mavericks, coaching staff and also him personally, where you would really want to take on that challenge, because you can only blitz so much in the half court in general. You're probably not going to do it to Kyrie Irving and Luka Dončić. Teams really haven't tried that too much. I mean, Oklahoma City has, they were really aggressive with blitzing Kyrie regardless, but they have, they're kind of uniquely equipped to do that, in my opinion, unless Boston's going to go small. I think, they could do it too, to a lesser extent, I feel like, but it would definitely require them playing small. Regardless, if Porzingis is on the court, I think Kyrie Irving is at his best as a player when he's attacking drop coverages and just slower bigs, because he is, like, for all the stuff that people like to, compliment him on, one of those things that makes him so lethal is just his balance and his change of pace. He really gets bigs on the ropes. We saw that with Rudy Gobert. Luka does as well. But, I think if he's going to get more traditional coverages that are like, base defensive stuff, you got to have that be your attack point and feast off of that, and then really make the Celtics have to reevaluate their approach, or live with Kyrie Irving scoring 20 plus in the first half, or, whatever it may be, at least getting great looks. If it's not scoring 20 plus, at least have the opportunity to potentially score 20 by being that aggressive. But I think, that kind of ties into the natural progression of how you attack, I think, in a game plan, because you also don't want to get into too many, like all those actions and stuff that are going to be game plan for naturally later in a series where they kind of dial up different coverages. So I think starting off a game, you're going to need Kyrie to be aggressive, ideally, or you just get surprise production. Like, I don't think you probably count on it, but, as you mentioned, the corner threes not being a volume mechanism for, the opposing team against the Celtics. You're going to need redrives and closeout attacks, things of that nature from Jones and, Washington. So I think that could be somewhere where you get some
Washington has shown the capability of being able to take the ball off the dribble and be able to attack the rim when he's had those closeouts come out on him. So he is capable of doing
definitely.
Those
and then I think you got to keep using some of those successful, sets as well too. At times, sprinkle them in, not overdo it to get them, really like at the focus of game planning to take away for the next game. But they've done a great job of that, like not to overcomplicate, like to sound smart, but like the 77 like veer action set that they like to do, where basically like the double drag screens happen, but there's a back screener. That's freed up like PJ Washington, Derek Jones for lobs at times. Doing stuff like that where you're putting bigs into the action and you're able to use your athleticism, that stuff really helps. And you're also not relying on those two camping in the corner. So I think we're going to need to see a little bit more of that kind of creativity, expand upon it in the finals. You got to have a lot of engagement with players in those actions. But you can't keep doing the same ones over and over again, because great defensive teams are going to be able to, review the film of 3 playoff series, scout it out, and then be more prepared for it, because they have the personnel, the versatility, to do that with, 4 on-ball defenders that are, capable threats. But definitely, going to have to get creative, I think, by, not relying as much on the, read and react situations. Because I think, with Luka playing, downhill, he's a phenomenal player and going to make the right read time and time again. But I think you want to take pressure off of him against, like Jaylen Brown guarding him at the start of a game. And then then he's drawing a switch and it's still Derek White or Drew Holiday. Like, even though those are the last 2 I mentioned are smaller defenders, and that's an advantage for Luka to create, you're still going to be facing a great defender, and that's taxing throughout an entire game. So definitely want to be, it's easy to say, as creative as possible offensively, but that you're going to want to see a little more to, really not rely on, fully spacing out and not getting corner threes when they're not going to be given up. But then also, like the another element, just thinking about it, if you have the closeout attacks, you got to be leery of that running into spacing problems at times, because if they are going to cross match and you are going to naturally have the big gravitate to the dunker spot, then sometimes if they're not flashing properly, or the way the momentum goes with the ball, sometimes that's not going to be as much of an advantage on that closeout attack. And then that makes it more pressure for Washington and Jones to make floaters instead of getting all the way to the rim too. So just like going to be interested to see like little things like that, how they play out in the start of the series, and how, the Mavericks managed to adjust and things of that nature.
Yeah, because one of the things that Boston, presents, with them, as good as they are, is that they've got 4 and 5 guys that can really defend. I mean, you've got, really great defenders with Derek White and Drew Holiday. We had a comment about how they're really excited about the matchup of Drew Holiday matching up against Kyrie Irving. That's one matchup that I'm looking forward to seeing. But you had mentioned a little bit, Jaylen Brown's going to take his turns on Luka Dončić. You may even see Jaylen Brown at times on Kyrie Irving. We know that Kyrie Irving's been bothered by length a little bit in the playoffs as well, so there could be some of that where they've got long defenders. Derek White is a great shot blocker for his position as well. Drew Holiday is a ball hawk, can guard you 94 feet. Like, these are really good defenders. There's a reason why this is a top 5 defense in the league all year long, because there's multiple guys that can do a lot of different things on that end. And, you were talking about how, we've seen teams blitz Luka at times during the postseason trying to get the ball out of his hands. And, you mentioned the fact that Luka's going to make the right read every time. And he's so big, he's so strong, and he's got great vision that even if you're going to try to force the ball out of his hand at times, he's still going to be able to make some of those passes because he can see over the top, of defenders and be able to still make the right read. It's going to be on these other guys to be able to finish, to be able to make that effective, because you've got to be able to make Boston pay for the blitzing that they may do, trying to double either Luka or Kyrie. These guys, in terms of Josh Green, PJ Washington, Derrick Jones Jr., and others, they've got to make the Celtics pay for doing that, because if they don't, there's no reason for Boston to change and think, okay, well, we'll just let these guys continue to camp out here and take shots and miss shots. They've got to command the respect of Boston's defenders by making some of those outside shots. And then again, as you mentioned, attacking the rim and being able to hopefully start to get some of these guys into foul trouble, depending on, what you're seeing in terms of the matchups there in that way.
Yeah, definitely. I think overall you're definitely going to have to, be aggressive getting into the paint. And then I'm also just curious too, managing, Boston's high 3-point volume as well too.
The math game. Woo,
yeah,
the math game.
It's definitely a math game for sure. Because they get up. Sometimes they can get up like 45, something like that. Like if you that's where it becomes an interesting conversation, because sometimes when you put out a player like Tim Hardaway Jr. to get more volume, not all of those are going to be ideal shots, and you don't want to just hunt threes for the sake of hunting threes, and then you also don't want to take away from your defense as well too. So with them largely going away from Tim Hardaway Jr. in the Western Conference Finals, like ending the series with DNPs, I'd be curious to see what they're going to do with the bench rotation on the wing. We've seen Jaden Hardy, get opportunities, so he's someone that can get downhill, hit the catch and shoot shots as well too. So his production is going to be important. That's what it kind of ties back into how they perform the Western Conference Finals. You need to have multiple threats on the court that can attack, just initiate the offense, get them into stuff, and then generate that paint pressure. So he's going to be very important, because at times one of Luka or Kyrie will be off the court, and it'll probably be Jaden Hardy on there, and there'll be crazy ball pressure on one of the superstars, and they would gladly like to have Jaden Hardy try to make something happen against another great defender that they'll naturally have on the court as well too, because they have so many of them. And he's had it's kind of been it's been obviously overall impressive from him, but there are still some plays where you kind of see some over dribbling and some disruption as well too. So this will be a great indicator of his continued growth as well too, where he's going to have to counter the best defenders he's seen in this run and be able to stay poised and make the right play like almost every time, because the math game, like every possession matters, but it matters even more now against Boston. Yes. So definitely all those little things are going to add up throughout the course of a game.
Yeah, when you look at the 2 games that the Mavericks played against the Celtics this season, the last time they played each other was on March the 1st. In the first matchup, the Celtics shot 46, threes in that game. They shot around 33% in that first game, which was a win in Dallas. The second game, when they were in Boston, they won by 28. Again, that was on March 1st. They went 21 of 43 from downtown at nearly 49%. That's an absurd number. Like, first of all, taking 43 threes in a game is a lot, but making 21 of them, shooting nearly 50%, that's where things really start to turn for Boston, because we've seen, Grant, and you've watched the playoffs as much as anyone, Boston can tend to shoot themselves out of games at times, and the reliance on the three-point shot can get them in trouble, and they have given away games where they have just simply shot themselves out of games in the postseason. But when they are going and shooting at volume the way that they were during the regular season, they shot nearly 39%, from three, but they were also number one in the NBA, making nearly 17 threes per game. So they're going to take a bunch, and they're going to make a bunch as well. The question is, do you fall into the trap if you're the Mavericks or trying to keep up with that math game? Because if you do try to find yourself catching up or trying to keep up with that, you may get yourself out of character yourself and then find yourself trying to play that game that Boston wants you to, which is, hey, we want y'all to take a bunch of threes too, because we don't think that you can make as many as we will by the way that we play on the offensive end that way.
Yeah, definitely. And I think there's going to have to be a natural heavy emphasis on the three-point line. That's where this overall contrast in their typical defensive strategy is going to be fascinating to see, because part of that shooting execution that you mentioned, when they are on, you're taking the ball out of the net. You're not able to push the pace. So if one of your counteracting mechanisms to three-point volume is, well, we're just going to get to the most efficient thing in basketball, which is our transition offense, that's not going to be as prevalent if you're taking the ball out of the net as well too. So, and that's also why it's important that they added the centers that they've added over the last year too, because if they are missing those shots, you got to close the possession. And that was something that was absolute hell for them before acquiring them, where you would frequently see, like Tim Hardaway, I remember this actually. I remember asking about something along the lines of defense and rebounding, and he was like, well, I don't think it was a defensive problem. I think we had to close the possession. So basically you did everything well, but you can't rebound, is kind of along the lines of that. So that can't be the case for this team against Boston's offense, where you're making all the extra efforts, rotating, but you're not in a position to grab rebounds. So definitely going to be a really strong test for the coaching staff, and the ability to solve for the three, but also stay in position with the rebounding. But now they have way better personnel than they have to be able to actually close those plays, and that's just going to be as valuable as that offensive rebounding. And that's why Derek Lively being healthy is huge, because his activity is just incredible for this team. He gets a hand on the ball very often on both ends, whether he's coming away with the rebound or not. But he has had games grabbing 15 boards, and that's pretty fascinating considering he hasn't had ran up minutes 36 minutes or something like that too. So definitely going to need a lot of energy and effort from them on those defensive boards. And that's also the pressure of being a rim protector too, because if Boston isn't necessarily a high frequency, we're going to get to the rim team, they're more so going to settle for those tough too. So that's another element that I'm curious to see about, where if they can kind of funnel the offensive player downhill a little bit more. But then you also have to find that balance where Jayson Tatum's not shooting well on contested shots right now. So do you really want to funnel him particularly downhill right now, or see if kind of take a look, is that sidestep contested three still clicking at an 18% rate, or do you want to be oh damn, this is the series that he's going to hit all of those, and then we're having him score 40. So we like to say it a lot, but that's also why we're talking on this podcast, and people like the coaching staff are at the W or wherever the heck they are, trying to figure out their strategy before game one.
Yeah, because there's a lot of elements to this series, and obviously, we'll, before we finish up today, obviously the superstars are going to loom large in this series. But I mean, you mentioned Derek Lively, and he's been such a massive factor for this team. The reliance of him and his game in terms of his ability to rebound, his ability to play in space. He's got to be able to remain on the floor. Him and Gafford have got to find themselves remaining on the floor, because part of what's made the Mavericks so successful as well, especially during the regular season and in the postseason, is when they get that vertical game going, when they're playing off of the pick and roll, and when Lively's been able to make some plays, out of the short roll with some good reads that he's making as well. Those are the kinds of things that can put pressure, because I feel like from a physicality standpoint, the Mavericks do have the advantage here in terms of their ability to punish the Celtics inside, even with, Boston's ability to stretch the floor on the other end. I think they do have a size advantage and a strength advantage that they've got to play to. And part of this series as well is how is the series going to be officiated? We've seen some of the officials that are going to be, a part of this series, whether it be
the best
Tony
part
Brothers.
About the NBA.
Exactly. Exactly. Who's going to be the officials during this series? I mean, some of the names that are going to be part of this. That's right. That's right. Tony Brothers is a part of this series. Scott Foster's a part of this series. Bill Kennedy as well. Like, there are some of these officials that Mavericks fans don't necessarily like to get down with, but they're going to be a part of this NBA Finals. But that's been part of what's made the Mavericks so successful during the second half of the year, is playing up to that physicality. And when they've had the opportunity to do that, that's when they really can be able to put pressure on their opponents. How that will play itself out, I think, is going to be major in this series as well in that way.
Yeah, definitely. Because if you're going to get like over the back calls on Derek Lively after you haven't gotten those for like 3 rounds, or moving screen calls and all that stuff, that's definitely a rough set of circumstances. So definitely going to have to be disciplined about, the little things like that. Because at times, which is the case for any team, that, that's been something, where you can at least be grateful that you have another center to throw out there, but definitely don't want to have to, where, because I remember the game where, Derek Lively got hurt at the AAC against Minnesota. Daniel Gafford was in foul trouble at halftime when that happened.
Yes.
So that's, you create a much thinner margin for error in case something just happens, and you don't want to drop a game because of something like that. So definitely have to be careful with that overall. But then on the flip side as well, Luka Dončić puts a lot of pressure on any team, as we all know. So I think, if he's getting downhill and getting calls, that also that's kind of a layered set of circumstances for the Mavericks, because on the big stage, he's, the stakes are as high as it gets in the finals. So the frustration of not getting calls could be higher as well too. So if he is getting the call, going to the line, versus, potentially being, frustrated with not getting a call and maybe not like being the quickest guy down the court, that also has, a potential impact at times as well too. So yeah, it's always fascinating when you talk about this stuff, because there's always like a lot of layers that are just random, where you're like, that could, that's a 5 to 8 point potential factor right there. And we've talked about a lot of them so far. So I'm really curious to see how this, this all unfolds.
Yeah. And, with that being said, these series always comes down to, the stars and whose stars are going to show up. We've seen throughout this postseason, especially the biggest example in the Western Conference Finals, the duo of Luka and Kyrie showing up and performing better down the stretch of games, better than Karl-Anthony Towns and Anthony Edwards. We know the duo of Boston with Jayson Tatum and Jaylen Brown. Jayson Tatum, an All-NBA first teamer once again. Jaylen Brown, Eastern Conference Finals MVP, had a 40-point game in the series against the Indiana Pacers. For me, and I think for a lot of folks who are going to be watching this series, which duo do you trust the most in this series? And part of that question being, the Mavericks this year were 23-9 in the clutch. Only the Lakers had more wins in the clutch at 24 than the Mavericks did. The Mavericks were 7-2 on the road this postseason. In fact, they've got a better record in the road than at home during this postseason. So they have shown in the last 5 minutes of games and on the road that they're capable of winning down the stretch. For me, that is going to be the question that looms largest for me, is which duo will show up the biggest and most consistent throughout the course of the 7-game series. And Grant, honestly, right now, based on the way that we have watched Luka and Kyrie play down the stretch of the second half of the year and into the postseason, I wouldn't be mad if folks said that Luka and Kyrie are the duo that they trust the most right now over Jayson Tatum and Jaylen Brown, even with how talented Brown and Tatum are and what they've been able to accomplish over the last several years. You've got 2 closers in Luka and Kyrie who are not afraid of the moment, and that may loom large in this series against Boston in that way.
Yeah, I think it'll be a massive factor overall, because I think, as you said, these are 2 teams that are very effective defensively, and when it gets kind of down to that situation where those superstars are the difference makers. We've seen Kyrie Irving make some ridiculous shots. Luka make some ridiculous plays, including a game winner against 4-time Defensive Player of the Year. So I think that's definitely going to be a very important factor overall. But I think, just looking at Boston stars, I think, the way Jayson Tatum, he hasn't really necessarily been shooting well from three in the postseason overall so far.
It's true.
And, I think Jaylen Brown is probably comfortably the worst offensive player out of the four that we're talking about here as well, too. I don't think really anyone would be, arguing he's better than Kyrie Irving offensively or Luka. I don't think there's really conversation to be had there. And I think, honestly, too, Boston has been very ISO reliant throughout the playoffs as well, too. And Dallas has been fantastic at guarding ISO. I think that's kind of where it ties into that spacing element, too, where at times there's a big difference between a catch and shoot shot when there's flow versus, after posting up or just attacking, breaking someone down and making two dribbles and passing out versus the ball is being, really moved around in the half court. So I think if Boston does get stagnant offensively, I think that that ties into how Dallas is guarded very well throughout this postseason. I think they have options to throw at Tatum and Brown. I think a lot comes down to, obviously shots going in for everyone. That's not a crazy concept there, but Jayson Tatum, as we said, if he's not hitting those sidestep threes, you look a whole lot better defensively versus when those are dropping, then you start to second guess, maybe I need to account for this. Well, now he's going to be able to set you up, open up your stance to get downhill, going to his right hand, and then that opens up the rest of his game. Or if those turnaround jumpers or whatever he's going to try to do in short range aren't falling either, that kind of ends up being a situation where you can get a game where Shai Gilgeous-Alexander scores 10 points, 10 made twos in a single game, shooting 10 of 13 on those shots, barely taking any threes, and winning a game 4 on the road in Dallas's arena as that closer. Or it could be a situation where it's Anthony Edwards shot very poorly a couple games, and Minnesota didn't have enough firepower to be able to actually win. So that's, a lot's riding on those tough shots falling. Teams tend to, on the fly react to those shots going down, and it opens up, other things for himself and teammates as well, too, regardless of which star we're talking about. So definitely a big factor of that. And Dallas's stars have, as you said, they've shown the ability and the relentlessness on the road to rise to the occasion. And I actually, after covering this whole playoff run, I'm convinced they love the road more than they might love being loved at the AAC as crazy.
Especially Luka at times, for sure.
Yeah, you can tell they're just killers, and that's the killer mindset right there. You want to make someone else's day bad as opposed to hearing support. I'm sure they love obviously hearing support at the AAC, obviously, but just that different element of being the villain and taking the air out of the whole arena is definitely something this team thrives off of with its top players. And being a 5 seed throughout the whole run, you're going to want to have that ability against a team that's won 64 games that's going to be at home with home court advantage. So definitely, in a weird way, I almost feel better about them as a 5 or lower seed at this point. It's kind of weird where they love the road, because they also love dropping game ones for the most part too, instead of the finals. So that's kind of like a mulligan. All right, I'd rather lose our game 1 on the road anyways, and we have a crazy killer who wears number 77 who might just take game 2 as the difference maker in the following game, and we're going back home split 1-1. So that's another element of this too. I'm definitely curious to see with how polarizing of a matchup from a storyline standpoint this is. A lot of people have already made this point, but Kyrie getting all the boos and all that stuff, and Luka might take pride in stepping up and thriving off of that, feeding off of that for a team that he holds very closely. kind of like, protecting his own, if you will, someone
Yes.
that's helped him achieve his first finals appearance. So I've already seen a couple, Kyrie t-shirts around TD Garden. I've seen about 5 of those so far today. So, and Kyrie sucks, the PC version of that one. Too. So there's that. I'm already feeling the flashbacks to March 1, where Kyrie does his heart sign with his hands, and you just hear the crowd getting louder, booing him. So
yes,
it's gonna be fast.
Luka's a killer, man. And ladies and gentlemen, when Luka decides to make you his personal cause, you might as well take cover, because you saw what happened in the Minnesota series, whether it was Snoop Dogg or some random fan that decided to get after him. He made them his personal cause, and you saw what he did in the first quarter. Luka loves being on the road and relishing in those moments. And Boston is a place where, yes, they can get down in some ways that is unbecoming, if you will, and will find ways to try to get under the skin of both Luka Dončić and Kyrie Irving. I tell Boston fans, do that at your own peril, because Luka thrives off of that kind of energy. And you're right, taking it personal when it comes to defending his teammate and Kyrie Irving, I'm sure will be on his mind somewhat, because the greats always find that little extra motivation, whatever the case may be, that little slight or whatever it is, to be able to help push them. And Luka is very adept at doing that, and we've seen that throughout his career.
Doesn't have to look too far in this series.
No, he will not. He will not. And I think, as we conclude, the Mavericks, their job here in the first 2 games is to find a way to get a split. That was the goal. In all of these series, as you mentioned, being a 5 seed, they're looking to become the first 5 seed to win, an NBA championship. And there's all the pressure is on Boston here. Boston is the team that won 64 games. They're the team that had arguably the best offense in the league, one of the best defenses in the league. They shoot a ton of threes, make a bunch of threes. They were in the finals 2 years ago when they lost to the Golden State Warriors. And then, of course, getting back to the finals now under Joe Mazzulla. The pressure is on Boston to win this series. And if you're the Mavericks, you get to come into this series playing loose, playing fun, and going out there and being who you are. And if that is the case, then you start putting that kind of extra pressure on Boston to have to win. And if you're the Mavericks and you find a way to get a split, whether it be winning game 1 or winning game 2, or as they did against Minnesota, getting greedy and winning 2 games on the road, all you're doing is putting that much more pressure on Boston each and every time they step on the floor, because they are the ones that have got to deliver, because this has been a 7-8 year process for them to get to this point, to have a team as good as they have right now to try to win a championship. And if they don't, that will be a major disappointment for Boston. But yeah, the Mavericks have a golden opportunity here to really be able to take it to Boston and just be who they are and play the game that they're capable of to try and win this series. And with that, I guess we have to do the thing that everyone loves to do, which is, and you can throw your comments in there too as far as predictions are concerned, Boston is favored, obviously, to win this series. We just went through some of the numbers in terms of why they are favored to win this series. But I'm picking the Mavs in 7. I'm picking the Mavs in 7 to win this series. There's so many parallels from that 2011 team to this team here, whether you call it cheesy, whether you call it aura, whatever you want to call it. There's something special about this Mavericks team that sometimes just can't be quantified. And I think they have the goods to take out a Boston team who at times can really, act a little funny when it comes to certain playoff situations. I'm going to pick the Mavs in 7 to win their second championship in franchise history. That's not a homer pick. That's just a vibe that I got. That's a vibe that I got based off of watching all this playoff basketball and what the Mavericks have done so far this postseason.
Yeah, I think the general concept of the two best. Well, I mean, I don't know if you want to necessarily say Kyrie Irving over Jayson Tatum, but if you're gonna just compare in general, like in their roles, the number 1 and the number 2, I think the advantage is Dallas, and then they have a fantastic defense. Just got to see how they handle the 5 out, if Boston's hitting shots, all that stuff, everything we just talked about. But I think over the course of I think 7 games as well too. I think the Mavericks will manage to win the series, and I'll probably say 7 games as well too. I mean, because I've also been saying it on other things as well too. You don't want to just start switching it up before the first game. But I do think the amount of games could be definitely different For sure, because I remember against Minnesota, I said I don't want to sound too goofy if this doesn't play out. But I like saying 5, but I think the Mavericks they won in 5.
Woo.
So
And they did, yeah.
They did. They definitely did. I can't tell you I'm smart enough to say I predict Luka to hit a game winner against Gobert in game 2 and like steal both.
Which Luka's done a couple times against Boston. People need to go back. He's done a couple times against Boston throughout his career so far.
He definitely has. But I do think they'll win the series. How long it goes remains to be seen. But I'll just throw in 7 right now. I think that would be one hell of a situation of game 7 in Boston. They'll probably already be restocked on their Kyrie t-shirts by that point of the series as well too. In that banner 18, there's going to be a lot of anticipation for that to happen. But seeing Luka and Kyrie prevent that, a lot of storylines there would be very entertaining.
Grant, tell the folks where they can find you and what they can expect from your NBA Finals coverage throughout this series, man.
Yeah, on Twitter, X, whatever the heck you call it now, on @Grant Afseth, AFSETH. I have a lot of content on the Sports Illustrated Mavericks site, si.com/NBA/Mavericks. And then I'll have some content as well, too, throughout the finals on YouTube. And, surely we'll be doing stuff here. And, maybe with how excited people are nationally about this series, we might just be on a radio station in your random city if you don't live in Dallas, throughout the country and, even in other countries as well, too. So definitely a very interesting time to be covering the Mavericks.
Grant is all over this series. He's in Boston. He will be traveling throughout this series, so definitely give him a follow on Twitter @Grant Afseth. He's going to be providing tremendous coverage as he's done all year long, covering this Mavericks team all over the place, all over the world, literally all year long, from the time that we started in September in the preseason with the Abu Dhabi games all the way to the NBA Finals. Grant has been all over for this team, has provided tremendous coverage. So definitely give him a follow on Twitter. You'll get some of the best Mavericks coverage that you're looking for out there. You can find me on Twitter @Kevin Gray Sports. I'm, of course, your Mavericks pre- and post-game host on the Dallas Mavericks Radio Network. We will have every single game for you on 97.1 The Eagle beginning on Thursday night with tip-off at 7:30. My pregame show will begin at 7 p.m. If you're listening to it on Sirius, you can listen to it on Channel 86 and Channel 212 as well for the NBA play-by-play on Sirius XM as well. So plenty of ways to listen, and, of course, you'll be able to watch the game. I suggest if you're going to watch the game, watch it, turn the volume down so you don't necessarily have to listen to J.J. Redick, Mike Breen, and Dorsberg. If you don't want to, and you can listen to Chuck Cooperstein do his thing, of course, when it comes to the play-by-play for your Dallas Mavericks. It should be an incredible series. We cannot wait. It's been too long, damn it. We're ready for this series to start when it comes to the Mavericks and the Celtics. That'll do it for this episode of Inside the Mavs. Thank you so much to all those who joined in our show, who provided comments and questions. Really appreciate you supporting the show, and it means a lot to us that you continue to watch on especially our supersized NBA Finals preview show here on Inside the Mavs. You can download and subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcast for free. Give it a 5-star rating, write a review for it while you're there, and make sure that you follow Inside the Mavs wherever you get your podcast and here on Kevin Gray Sports on YouTube. And make sure you subscribe to Grant's channel on YouTube as well, @Grant Afseth on YouTube as well. He's got tremendous coverage and breakdowns there as well. For Grant, my name is Kevin Gray, your Mavericks pre- and post-game host on the Dallas Mavericks Radio Network. This has been Inside the Mavs, presented by Aura.